Hi, I'm Joseph R. Lewis and I write adventures. And today I'd like to talk about GaryCon because I just got home from GaryCon. If you have never heard of GaryCon, it is a small gaming convention, maybe medium sized gaming convention that's been going on for a very long time. It is located in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is the southern edge of Wisconsin, about an hour's drive north of Chicago. So I flew into Chicago and drove the rest of the way up to it. It takes place in the Lake Geneva Resort and Spa, which is a huge, sprawling hotel complex with golf courses and a ski slope. And it's right next to Lake Geneva itself, which is a beautiful little lake with a charming little tourist town full of fantastic looking restaurants. I'm not sure if all of them are open because it's the off season, it's March. But we were able to eat in a bunch of those places and they were all fantastic. So, as a location goes, it's pretty great. The event itself, GaryCon, is we'll try to give a sense of size and scale. It's about 3,000 people to maybe 4,000 people a year, taking place inside this hotel, the Lake Geneva Resort. And for comparison's sake, the largest event in our gaming community is Gen Con, which is about 70,000 people, so 20 times larger. And by comparison to that, we also have PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia in the winters. And that's currently, we think, around 20,000. I don't think we have hard numbers on that. Um, and we can compare that to something else like the smaller events I've been going to, like Game Face Con or Arcane Con, where the number of attendees is measured in hundreds. So Gary Con's sort of medium sized, it's in the thousands, but it's not overwhelming. I can compare it. I guess Gen Con is the easiest thing to keep comparing it to. Besides, it is smaller. It is also far more focused on TTRPG play. Whereas at Gen Con, we had a lot of card games, board games, even some video games. There was a huge cosplay aspect at Gen Con. The crowd probably also skewed much younger in general. But at GaryCon, we had probably a more mature crowd. I felt very comfortable there. Um, Highly focused on TTRPGs and also wargaming. There were some wargaming rooms. But almost the entire space was filled just with round tables that had 6 to 8 people who were all playing TTRPGs the whole time, which was pretty great as an environment to be in. It felt very comfortable. It felt like everyone was doing the same thing and was there for the same reason. There was an exhibit hall, for for vendors to show up and sell their wares. And again, for comparison's sake, when you go to something like PAX Unplugged or Gen Con, you might have hundreds of vendors in massive, so almost warehouse size spaces. Here at GaryCon, we had, I think, about 70 vendors in what you might describe as a large high school auditorium sort of space. They were all great vendors. There were a lot of well-known artists, as well as all the big stores you would expect to see. My buddies from Pirate Borg were there, Small Giant Games, Arcane Library, lots of folks, especially folks selling very old gaming, or vintage, I should say, gaming books and magazines. So we spent a lot of time digging around through all that stuff. So more petite, smaller, more intimate space for sellers. But again, I think the focus of the event was mostly on the TTRPG play. In my last video, I talked a lot about one-shots and how to design a one-shot, and I kept referencing playing at a con because I think that's one of the more common places to play a one-shot outside of your home game when you're trying out new things. So at GaryCon, I played 4 or 5 games, each time for 3 to 4 hours. It was a gaming-heavy week for me. I played FKR, Shadow Dark, Swords of Wizardry, Mothership, all of them one shots. And I took note of the fact that almost all of the GMs running those games were using what looked like 1 or 2 sheets of paper to support most of the play. The Mothership game was two pieces of paper that the GM had. The FKR game was it was a small binder, but that's because it was his raw notes and he hadn't compiled it into a tighter document yet. I think it'll be a lot shorter when he's done with that. The Shadow Dark adventure we had, I think, fit on just a couple of pages. And I'm just pointing this out to, again, convey you can fill hours of playtime with very small documents, with very small amount of information for your GM. A couple other random thoughts that I came away from the event were just about how to GM at a game like this or at an event like this. And mostly that was about things like be cognizant of the fact that you're going to be speaking for 4 hours at a time, if not multiple times across multiple days. And that's going to wear out your throat. Drink lots of water, take breaks, think about the register of your voice. When I'm doing a lot of talking, I find that I start dropping into lower registers and using a deeper voice because that's easier on my throat than using a higher, more intense voice. Other things are just being organized with your notes, but also just be very forgiving of yourself if you can't find page 3 and that thing you wanted to find, and just keep playing. I don't think anyone's going to care or judge as long as they're having fun. I think that's the nature of our hobby. Also, almost every table I was at had something like 8 people around it. The GM and 7 players, I think, was pretty much the common thing. It's a lot of people to manage and to interact with. And we tried to be respectful players, but there was also crosstalk. We were having a lot of fun. We were there with friends, which was great. So again, there's management of people trying to keep up the tempo, trying to give everyone a little attention as you go around. But again, it's going to be a little bit chaotic, and forgive yourself for not being perfect. One of the problems that we frequently ran into at GaryCon was the spaces that we were playing in were often large meeting rooms or small ballrooms or whatever they may be. And they would have many, many tables sitting right next to each other, again, each with 8 people. Some of them were very rambunctious and very loud. And with all those voices bouncing off hard walls, it very quickly became difficult to hear our GM and hear each other. So communication became difficult. Sometimes we had to ask other people to try to keep down the noise. There was one room that I played in where they'd actually hung heavy curtains, which helped to deaden the echoing effect, which is actually something I should probably do in here because my voice is echoing just a little bit in this tight office. But if you're ever running an event, that is something to think about. Ways to deaden the echoing of sound, like hanging heavy curtains. It's very, very effective for that. But yeah, all in all, we had a great time. It was not stressful. It was not a crowded environment. I can get a little anxious sometimes being in crowded hallways and crowded rooms, and it was never very intense. Although we did most of our gameplay on Thursday and Friday, which were probably the lighter attendance days. We saw the attendance; it was getting a little more crowded on Saturday, which was about the time we were wrapping up, and the event went on through Sunday as well. So maybe the weekend crowd was a bit more intense, bit heavier. So your mileage may vary depending on what your experience is. But I didn't find it overwhelming or stressful to be in the space, to be moving around. It was a little hard to navigate because the event was spread out across so many buildings and different rooms. But once you get the hang of it and you look at the map, you can figure it out. It just wasn't very intuitive at first, but it wasn't that bad. The food at the hotel was pretty good, but if you can grab a car and run into town, there are some fantastic options, some small restaurants. We went to a Thai place. Shout out for the House of Bogini. We love the House of Bogini and the Simple Cafe. Those are all great spots down in town where we had some wonderful meals. But overall, it was a great event. I'm definitely planning to go back next year. Um, it was more fun as a space to hang out in and to play games in, I think, than something as huge as Gen Con, which was a little overwhelming and had a little too much to do, but also had a lot of things that I personally wasn't interested in, like the card games and the board games and whatnot. So if you want to have an event where you focus purely on TTRPG and wargaming at the table with your friends or with new players, GaryCon might be something you want to check out. And that's my whole report on that. So good luck out there.